I don't recall exactly how old I was. I think I was in grade school, and I shared a room with my younger brother. And if memory serves, we came home from school, which that school I walked to, it was at that time, 3 houses down. Now they built some more, so it's like 5 houses down. Hadn't got any farther away. They just stuck some houses in the middle. And I came in from school, and I'll never forget, it was a sunny day. And on our beds were brand new Zebco 303 fishing combos. I was so excited. I don't know if Tina got one, but the boys did. Do you remember that? Yeah, that was such an exciting day. I used to go, I don't even remember the name of the town, but used to go on a fairly regular basis to, we'll call it Suburban Social Circle. If you know Georgia at all, and would fish a pond out there. And then as I got older, went off to college, often when I came home, I wouldn't even go to the house. I'd go to Gary's house, and we'd either golf or fish, and sometimes both. And so we had a great time fishing, still enjoy it with my youngest. It's such a great hobby and pastime. I've never had to do it to survive, although early in marriage there were a few times where I was thankful I had a good day because we didn't throw them back, we kept them, we filleted them, and we ate them. But I've never had to do it as my means of surviving in this world. And I find the call of the disciples, I'm in Mark 1 here in just a moment, I find the call of the disciples fascinating and instructive on so many levels. You've probably read this more than once before, but let's read it again. Passing alongside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, and we know Simon is Peter. We typically call him that instead of Simon. Simon and Andrew, the brother of Simon, casting a net to the sea, for they were fishermen. They did it to survive. They probably enjoyed it. What is it they say about your work? Do something you love, then you're never going to work. You're just going to do the thing you love. Assume they enjoyed it, but we know they had to do it to survive. I don't know if they were working for somebody else, for a larger fishing conglomerate maybe, or if they're only working for themselves, but they were feeding their families in more ways than one. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And immediately, one of Mark's favorite words, immediately they left their nets and followed him. And going on a little farther, Jesus, saw James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, who were in their boat mending the nets. So obviously they're also fishermen. That's their trade. And immediately he called them. And they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired servants and followed him. You imagine for a moment doing what you love, or at least doing what you've always known, something that you're probably pretty good at because you're able to take care of your family and yourself, able to make a little money to survive. So whatever that is that you're doing, here comes Jesus. And he simply says, "Follow me." And notice the wording, "I will make you become fishers of men." And in both cases, with Peter and Andrew and also with the other set of brothers, James and John, what do? Immediately they leave. In fact, James and John leave their father in the boat working, and they go and they follow Jesus. And I focus on that wording in Mark about Jesus saying, immediately, or I will make you become fishers of men, because if you pay attention to that wording, Jesus is telling them there's a process here. We're going on a journey. You're not going to jump out of the boat and get on land and immediately be where it is that I intend for you to be. That's why, again, he says, I will make you become. We're going to walk this path together. You're going to follow me, and you're going to, as he says, was it Matthew 11, and learn of me. You're going to take my yoke on because it's easy and it's light, and I'm meek and lowly in heart. And so I think they understand, first of all, what it is they're leaving. They're leaving a lifestyle. They're leaving a trade, although they will, as we know, go back to it from time to time. They have to, keep bread on the table, as it were. But the point here is that Jesus is calling them into a journey toward discipleship. It's not something that happens overnight. But he's not only going to be instructing them and showing, and I know this is basic, by the way, but just work with me here. He's not only showing them, will be instructing them on how to be disciples, he's leading them beyond becoming disciples into being people who make disciples. Because what Jesus is doing, he's making them disciples, and then he's making them disciple makers, if that came out right. And in order to make disciples, this is important, by the way. In order to be people who make disciples, we must first and always be disciples. Let me read that again. In order to make disciples, we must first and always be disciples. As Christian men and Christian women, Jesus has called us into a life of being and becoming disciples, but also of becoming makers of disciples. John 7, the last verse, starts a favored story of many. They went each to his own house. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. And if you're familiar with John's Gospel, especially the first half of it, over and over again, Jesus is in these interactions and discussions, not only with his disciples nearby, but mostly with the religious leaders, the Pharisees, scribes, and others. So they went each to his own house, but Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. It's probably a little hyperbole there. I imagine one or two didn't show up. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, teacher, Moses commanded us to stone such women, so what do you say?" This they said to test him, John adds helpfully, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is out without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." And once more, he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones, presumably wiser. And Jesus was left alone with a woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, you notice what's going on here. They question him. He kneels down, writes, stands up, speaks, kneels down, stands up and speaks. So he stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more." And normally we stop the story there because that kind of bookends that particular vignette, doesn't it? But look what happens next. Again, Jesus spoke to them, saying, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now, they're going to go on right after this. In fact, verse 13, they're going to go on, the Pharisees, and they're going to start arguing with Jesus. But a couple things that I want us to notice in this familiar story about the woman caught in the act of adultery. And really, I want us to think about Jesus' interaction with the religious leadership that brought the woman to him and put her in, quote, the midst. What Jesus is trying to do with those individuals, and I can just say those men because it is men, what Jesus is trying to do with those men is similar to what he's doing with those 12 that he called. He's trying to help them understand there's a different way to live and to interact with the people around us. He's trying to help them see that. That's why he makes that one statement, let him who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. And guess what happens? You don't have to guess, we just read it. But what happens? They change their behavior. Oh, they'll come back. But what were they ready to do? They're ready to throw stones. But with Jesus' guidance, with his leadership, we could even call it, with him being intentional, and obviously there's an interaction with this woman too, not part of this sermon, but very important interaction. The disciples are surely in the area, right? And they're overhearing this as well. So this is part of their becoming fishers of men. But Jesus is also teaching the Pharisees. He's trying to, quote, disciple them as well to live in God's way instead of the way that they thought all along is God's way, which is not. And so, at least for a moment, they drop their rocks. They change their behavior. And they walk away. And Jesus says to them again, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And can we go to the next verse? I don't know if it's queued up. So the Pharisees said to him, you are bearing witness about yourself, your testimony is not true. And then there's this back and forth between them and Jesus about testimony being borne, and he'll talk about how the Father also bears witness to him, therefore his testimony is true. But I read that just to say that they're not going to walk away for long. Their behavior is going to return to what it was before. And here's a truth. Earlier I said in order to make disciples, we must first and always be disciples. Here's another truth. If we reject the headship of Christ in our lives, we will never reflect the light of Christ in the world. If we reject the headship of Christ in our lives, as many of these religious leaders and others in that world did, and many in our world do too, if we reject the headship of Christ in our lives, we will never reflect the light of Christ in the world. John 13. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, different Simon, of course, than the Peter we know, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things in his hands, that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. I'm going to finish this through 15 in just a minute, but like I like to do, let's get the image in our mind here and imagine some things I believe that were going on. So Jesus gets up from supper, And he goes over and he dons clothing of a common servant. Do you think the other guys noticed him doing that? I think so. In fact, in the video in my brain, I have Jesus taking his time doing this. Because see, this is part of his instruction. This is a nonverbal way, and he did it many times nonverbally, a nonverbal way where Jesus is continuing to show these men, these men whom he's called to himself, these men who are closest to him, he's showing them how to become not just disciples, but also fishers of men. And so he gets up, and I think it's incredibly dramatic, and I think it's a pin drop moment, honestly. You know, at the very least, when he gets on his knees and starts washing feet, you know it's a pin drop moment. So here he goes, and he dons that clothing, wraps the towel around his waist, he gets the basin of water, he pours it, he washes the feet and dries them with a towel that was wrapped around or wipes them. Then verse 6, he came to Simon Peter. Now it's not going to be quiet anymore because, Peter's got to say something. Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing now you don't understand, but afterward you will understand. See, Peter's becoming. You see that in there? He's in the process of becoming. Jesus answered him, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, the one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you. There's plural, by the way, both of them. For he knew who was to betray him. That was why he said, not all of you are clean. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? What's probably the short answer to that? Nope. Do you understand what I've done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. I love that little phrase in Scripture, just as. It's one word in the original, kathos, just as. Do you understand what I've done, Jesus says? You're on a journey of becoming disciples and becoming makers of disciples. That's the journey you're on. You don't understand right now, but afterward, you're going to understand what's going on. And you've seen me do this. You've watched me silently wash your feet. You've watched me get on my knees like a common slave, like a common servant, and wash your feet, including you, Judas. And you need to understand that you do this just as I have done it. This is what you do. Jesus said, as my disciple. This is what you do. John 15. Jesus speaking. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. That's part of the becoming process, isn't it? Sometimes we have to be pruned. Sometimes disciples have to experience discipline. Already you are clean because of the word that I have spoken to you. Similar themes as to John 13. And then he says this, over and over again he uses this term. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you, Jesus says, unless you abide in me. I'm the vine, Jesus says. I'm the vine. I'm the teacher. I'm the one you call teacher and Lord. I'm the one you call teacher and Lord who got down on his knees and who washed your feet and told you that in order to be my disciple, you need to be just as I am. These are the things you need to be doing to be disciples and makers of disciples. I am the vine. You, he says, are the branches. Whoever abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. I am the vine, Jesus says. We are the branches, Jesus says. Whoever abides in Jesus and he in us, it is that person that bears much fruit. Because if the branch is not attached to the vine, the branch can do nothing. Brothers and sisters, we are in the process of becoming. We're on a journey of becoming. A journey that's going to last to the grave and the final trumpet, whichever one comes first for us. And just as Jesus called Simon and Andrew, and Jesus called James and John, and later he would call Matthew from his trade and others from theirs, just as he called those 12, he's called us. And most of us in here this morning have answered that call in faith. We've been immersed. We've become children of God. And Jesus has placed upon us the same expectations that he did upon those original 12. If you're in me and I'm in you, you're going to be good to go. You're in the process, and I'm in the process of becoming. In modern parlance, Jesus called them, and he's called us to go fish. He's called us to go fish. And just a couple things about that, but just to remind us, in order to make disciples, first of all, we must first and always be disciples. If we reject the headship of Christ in our lives, and there are many ways in which we can do that. If we reject the headship of Christ in our lives, we will never reflect the light of Christ in the world. And finally, in calling us to go fish, Jesus expects us to fish with many different tools. And those tools include our words, our attitudes, our actions, our thoughts, and our hearts. That's what he's called us to fish with. That's what he's shown us to fish with. I'll close with the two verses that Fred read for us a little while ago, and then the lesson is yours. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you